So, as we move forward with Unit 2 and as we work on our revised academic papers, I thought it would be useful to take a moment to go back to Unit 1 of the course and kind of just catch up on what we've learned so far. First, we learned from Lloyd Bitzer that rhetorical communication is bound by situation. And when reading and discussing Chandler, we talked about how genre is a choice we make in response to situation that helps us control our relationship with our audience by setting their expectations. And when a situation requires that we learn a new genre to communicate, we need to build a research process that helps us understand the tropes and characteristics of the genre, not necessarily just the topic we want to write about, but we need to research the kind of thing that we're writing too. In Unit 1, we did that by using models and looking at example of similar pieces in order to draw influence for our own, and looking at some how-to type texts that teach us how to do a certain thing technically, or maybe just help us to think theoretically about the genre or certain features of the genre, as in Unit 1 with branding for our Web 2.0 projects. Our goal in Unit 2 is going to be to use what we learned about genre in Unit 1 to relearn our approach to the academic paper. A genre many of us have been asked to perform throughout our lives, but about which many of us likely still have lots of questions and likely tensions too. So hopefully we can resolve some of those this unit. In that this is not a new genre for us, it's worth reviewing what we likely already know about academic papers. Now, because we can't just simply discuss this in class, I'll be making some assumptions based on what I've learned from previous classes' answers to this question. So generally, we know that an academic essay consists of an intro, body, and conclusion, uses citation to track its sources, it seeks to communicate some kind of central idea, usually called a thesis or proposition. And from Harris, we learned that an academic essay should also engage in some kind of discursive interchange with other texts, whether that be to build on and push forward ideas that we see as valuable, or to question ideas that we see as limited. Given our prior experience with the genre and our resource for how to use other texts in our writing in Harris, we should be in pretty good shape. So let me do some cleanup on some concepts in academic writing that are crucial to understand when you're working to get papers published or accepted to conferences. There are two kinds of submissions that you can make as a writer: solicited or unsolicited. In every case, it's advantageous to be responding to a solicitation when you're seeking publication. In academia, those solicitations are called calls for papers, or calls for short. Let's take a look at one. Here's a call for papers for an industrial organization conference being hosted by the University of Maryland. It's published on Northeastern's own website. I found it with just a quick search through the Northeastern website. Really, your university website should be a good place to look for solicitations, by the way. All colleges and universities have opportunities for folks to publish with their various publications and at their, present at their various conferences, but also they offer opportunities specifically to undergraduates too. So for instance, I would be remiss if I didn't mention NU Writing, which is the English department and the writing program's own offering to undergraduate students that does publish work from this course. So keep that in mind. You can use that call for this assignment as well. But also, I would check with your department to see if there are undergraduate conference or publication opportunities. And if you can, choose a call that you might actually want to respond to. However, for this assignment, you're fine to choose any call for proposals, current or expired, to respond to. Whatever helps you direct your work toward the most specific audience possible. So, for instance, this call that we're looking at here, this is obviously a reputable conference, and you can tell that by the fact that it's the 21st iteration of it is being held at the Capitol Hilton in Washington, D.C. So, maybe there's an element of prestige here, I'm not sure. The conference will be hosted by the University of Maryland Department of Economics and will include panel discussions, contributed sessions on all topics in industrial organization, including antitrust economics and regulation. So this is outside of our subject area here, but it still helps us to kind of figure out how a call works. So it's telling you that the topics that they're interested in exploring in the conference and the kinds of papers that they're looking for. And so they're setting a sort of constraint or limitation on what you could submit. Then they announce some awards that are going to be given out. There's a actual submission portal that you can go through here that obviously I'm not going to take us through. This one looks like it was set up quite a while ago, so that should be interesting to use. And they offer some deadlines as well as information about whether or not there's a submission fee, when the announcements for decisions will be made, and when you have to register if you're going to present. They have further guidelines here. Here it basically just lays out that you have to actually present at the conference, and you have to actually work on other sessions at the conference as well. And here, they have some different prizes that they're going to offer, as well as some other, different subsessions, how the conference overall will be broken down. And then it gets into stuff that's more, what we call in the industry boilerplate, which is an old publishing term for kind of just the parts of the communication that you're sending out, usually in a public relations context, which is pretty much what this is. It's what you include on everything that goes out about this particular. Here it would be probably the conference, and that's the people who are involved, and then down here we have the person through the university who's publishing. So really the things that we want to do are probably pull out from this the specifics about the topics that they want to cover in the conference, and then maybe some ideas about how they constrain our approach to those topics, but then also looking at opportunities here. So maybe if we look at past iterations of the conference and what past iterations of the conference have been like, that might give us an idea of like, hey, I can propose this panel that I'll run if you can get these other people to participate with me. So yeah, that's calls for proposals. They're happening in perpetuity. So you should have some kind of method for, compiling them and keeping track of them, so that when, calls come up that, stand out to you and give you a good reason to respond, you're, prepared to do that. Abstracts serve many purposes, but their primary purpose is to expedite research. Similar to how an executive summary helps an executive make a decision on a matter without thoroughly perusing the entire report, an abstract lets us know if a paper will be valuable in our research. Here we have an example that comes from a past student. She's writing here about a concept called conversational agents, and she sets context by saying that in recent years, they've been becoming more valuable in a variety of fields. She goes on to discuss then that there is still limited research in, how to best utilize these conversational agents, and proposes this idea of dialogue systems. And she goes on to state very directly, in this paper, we present an empirical study comparing user feedback regarding chat bots that ask questions about users' mental well-being through either a text and GIF dialogue style or a plain text dialogue style. So they're collecting information about how folks prefer to interact with these artificial systems. And that would be what we would call the thesis here, right? And this is a thesis-driven paper, not a proposition-driven paper. While both, rely on argument and both are rooted in argument fundamentally, I think a proposition-driven paper is a little bit more overtly argumentative in terms of proposing maybe a specific idea, response, solution, whatever it might be, to a situation. So the writer here is going more broad than that, and rather just discussing directly in a meta-contextual way what the paper is and how it will work. Abstract should speak to three key aspects of your project. Context. Why are you writing this? Why should we be interested? This is your opportunity to make clear to the reader what the purpose of your paper is, but maybe in a more indirect way, maybe in a way that ties it out to a broader social context, or relies on maybe something anecdotal, or as we saw in the example that we just looked at, speaks to the importance of examining an emerging, idea, approach, technology, whatever it might be. Then you need to talk about your methods, right? How did you do your research? Was it mostly secondary? Was it mostly primary? If you're doing an experiment, how were you interpreting the data? How did you set the experiment up? And then to some degree, how the paper itself is laid out as well. And then results. What are the outcomes of your work? You want to include that as well. As we learned last unit, our audience's perception of our credibility is vital. There are many ways to signal insider status when preparing a paper that will expedite your audience's acceptance of your credibility. From citation and other formatting considerations, to then potentially more discriminatory aspects of your writing, like voice or formality, writing style, grammar, spelling. Your literature review is one of those ethos opportunities. It's a chance for you to show that you're familiar with the historical arc of the known research on your topic and the key points to highlight in that research in building context for your own project. Those are the two major goals. So you probably want to highlight maybe three major texts, one from the beginning of the study, one from the middle, and one close to contemporary, that just kind of build a nice story up to the particular research that you are working on. Since some of you are working on emerging technologies, there might not be much. You may make a choice that a literature review is not advantageous based on the particular topic that you've chosen. Maybe it's better to just not include it at all. You can't do that for this assignment, but in the real world, there's nothing stopping you. Probably the most crucial way to show that you are familiar with the metastructures of discourse in your field is to be sure that you're using the right citation system. After all, the consequences for being out of citation system could be that your work is considered plagiarism. One of the key disconnects that student writers might have with their institution's expectations for their academic writing is that we usually learn citation in the classes in which we also learn writing, and most people who teach writing use MLA. Maybe we also acknowledge APA and Chicago Manual, but you can see from this wiki page that the full picture is much more complex than that. That's even mostly just looking at stuff in the humanities. From there, of course, law has its own internal citation system. Many different branches of the sciences have their own preferred citation systems, as well as in the social sciences. And something you're probably interested in looking at would be the IEEE citation system, which is created by this Institute for the Electrical and Electronics Engineers. Here, if we look at the IEEE style page, it's pretty spare. There's not much there. But I'm sure that the citations page here can lead us to some resources that will help us figure out how to do IEEE style, and I believe several of the examples that I provided for you all use IEEE as well. So outside of my area of expertise, but something that's vital for folks in your area of expertise to have in their toolkit when writing in an academic or even in some professional context, because sometimes those interests dovetail. Okay, so now that we have our work set up for us for this paper, we understand that using the method that Harris proposes in his book Rewriting, we're going to dig the paper up from its roots, explore new contexts, new audiences, new ways of presenting the paper. We're going to do that through an increasing engagement with sources via some of the tools that he gives us in the Rewriting book as well, like, forwarding and countering and the sub moves too. From there, we're going to look to make sure that we have a good understanding of, what the field-based context for the paper is, and format and structure our paper in a way that will meet the audience's needs within that field-based context, or maybe expectations is a better word. We've got to look at citation systems. It's probably a good idea to include a literature review, and you're required to for the assignment. And we want to make sure we have a nice, compact, concise abstract that also is packed with good context and information for the audience as well. I'm requiring an annotated bibliography. I've provided you with a text that you can read for that. And I'm also going to include a slideshow that has some examples too, but you can also find examples in some of the past student work that I've given you all in the OneDrive too. So next up is peer review. I'm publishing your peer review pairs. I'm publishing the assignment as well. I'm asking you to do a rhetorical analysis of your partner's paper. We're going to start with something called a descriptive outline, and then from there we're going to move into an assessment of how your partner is managing the different Aristotelian appeals that they're trying to make throughout the paper. So interested to see your work on the papers. Make sure that you share your work in peer review as well as your draft of the paper with your partner for peer review in a timely manner, and get your peer review work back to them in a timely manner. It's a pretty hefty assignment. The last thing that I think that I would want to say there is to remind you all that, I've given you some examples. You don't necessarily have to submit work to the level of completion of those examples. Everything is a draft. Everything is just a version that you're making for now. And my assessment will just be constructive criticism on how to get the project to the next step. So drafts for peer review can be at any stage of completion. Even if you want to submit just the old paper, that's fine. It can kick off the conversation that you need to have with yourself about what you need to do in revision.